Although this particular Rick Steves tour has Salzburg and Vienna as the high points of the tour, to me, I was more anxious to see Hallstatt. Although the other cities are always talked about in the history of Europe and empires and wars, Hallstatt has a quiet but rich history going back to before some of the major cities of the continent even existed. Hallstatt was an economic powerhouse even during Celtic times due to the salt mines. The Hallstatt culture was the predominant Western and Central European culture as far back as the late Bronze Age. The term Hall actually goes all the way back to the Celts. They used the word to denote those places that were sources of salt. An object was found made of deer antler, presumably used to dig out salt all the way back in the Neolithic age. That's 7,000 years ago. It's also thought that the oldest staircase in Europe has been found in Hallstatt. Although the culture was based on farming and mining of salt, metalworking was also considerably advanced, and there was long-range trade within the area, including Mediterranean cultures. This made this little place very big economically, and then also a target for a lot of empires around it. Another find that interested me, that I learned in documentaries, was that the man in salt was found here. In 1734, 3 miners discovered a male body inside a Hallstatt salt mine. It turned out to be the well-preserved body of a prehistoric miner. Due to the salt, the corpse had been conserved so well that its clothing was still intact, and even the skin and hair were recognizable. After thorough analysis and investigation, today's assumptions is that this man was the victim of a mining accident approximately 1000 BC and laid hidden under debris and rubble for many centuries until finally being discovered in the 18th century. One of the high points on any trip I take is to see and walk in places that I see in documentaries or read about in history books. That's why I force myself onto a plane and drive Leslie nuts to walk and see the places and things that others have been for thousands of years. Many people in this area adopted Martin Luther's Reformation and fought strongly against the Counter-Reformation, especially the miners. They were so against it that all of the bridges were removed in 1601. The salt pans were emptied and the barge and timber transport closed down. In the Catholic churches, Protestant preachers called for opposition to the authorities in religious matters. However, the Archbishop of Salzburg's troops quelled the rebellion. The leaders were condemned to death and their houses burned. As in most communities, Hallstatt lost some of its privileges for some years. Soldiers marched in again in 1734 when Protestants from Hallstatt were taken away in the night on salt barges and compelled to emigrate to Siebenburg. Only the tolerance patent from Emperor Joseph II made it possible for Protestants to practice their religion, but only to a limited degree, whatever that meant. It wasn't until 1861 the Protestant patent from Emperor Franz Joseph I placed the Protestant faith on equal footing with the Catholics. The Catholic parish church has a famous bone house and cemetery. At that time, and until fairly recently, you didn't own burial plots, you rented them. And if no one paid the rent, the bodies were dug up and placed in the bone house to make room for their newer paying clientele. The identity of the deceased family member was preserved by decorative paintings and inscriptions. The oldest painted skull in Hallstatt dates back to about 1720, though some unpainted ones may actually be older. As for the newest, that's from 1995, long after Hallstatt stopped being used for new bones in the 1960s. It only takes the tram 3 minutes to climb the 1,148 feet above the rooftops to the top of the mountain. You can go into the mines if you wanted to, but we just went up there to enjoy the view and the lunch. During the war, Lake Hallstatt became a dumping ground for weapons, counterfeit money, and concentration camp lists as the enemy fled south from Allied troops. This town and the surrounding area became mountain retreats for Nazi officials who built mansions on the shores of many of its lakes and tested submarines in these deep waters. Although I don't think Nazi-stolen art was hidden in these mines, they were hidden in salt mines about 20 minutes from Hallstatt. Hallstatt has just over 700 inhabitants, but it gets up to 10,000 visitors a day during the high season. Residents are calling for limits on the number of daily tourists and for a ban on tour buses after 1700 hours local time. The mayor of the town said he wanted to reduce the number of buses that pass through by a third. Some residents briefly erected a wooden wall on the most popular spot to take selfies, blocking the view of the Alps, in protest against noise pollution and traffic. After a backlash on social media, though, they were removed. 2024 will be the last time that Rick Steves tours will stop here at Hallstatt. That is too bad.